thank you for joining us this evening. Over the next period, we intend to bring you discussions and programs that are of interest to you and can catch the imagination. My guest this evening is John Samuelsen, who's the International President of the Transport Workers Union, one of the most powerful unions in America, one of the most influential unions in America. And John, I have to say, is centered to that influence. He is someone who has been to the forefront of union development, union growth, the defense of workers' rights, the defense of their interests, but equally, not only from a union perspective, but the things that affect everyday life. So John, thank you for this ungodly hour of appearing on the program. And I hope you're well, and I hope your family are well.
Yeah, all is well. We've been blessed in that COVID-19 has really not hit my family directly. Unfortunately, it's hit the workforce of the TWU and essential workers across the country in a really significant way. And hopefully we're pulling out of it. This latest wave, hopefully will run dead into the vaccinations going on across America right now. And hopefully we pull out of it, both the physical toll of COVID-19 and economically as well, because we're in the middle of an economic disaster.
Yeah. I can't help but just catch, and I suppose it's deliberately like that, your backdrop is absolutely stunning.
Yeah, the backdrop is really, honestly, it's kind of an ode to my father and the kind of the hard blue collar men that raised me up. That's really what it is. It's a lot of 1980s, 1970s kind of memorabilia for me, but also, things that I strongly believe in. The Republican movement, the unification of Ireland, the New York Mets baseball club, the trade union movement. The trade union movement certainly is the last bastion of hope for American families and the pursuit of economic security. Hopefully with the election of Joe Biden and the departure of Donald Trump and particularly the departure of Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader, hopefully working people will begin to get a fair shake again over the next 4 years. But certainly without the trade union movement, this would have never happened. And without the trade union movement holding the Democratic Party accountable in DC, it definitely won't happen. So we really are the last bastion of hope for American workers.
I mentioned, and I know you're quite modest about this, but I have to say it so that people understand the interview. You're one of the most influential union leaders, and your union is a massively influential union within American society in terms of transport and all the stuff that is required for modern life. You're very young to hold such a serious position. How did you arrive? I think 2017 was when you actually took on the job as international president. How did you arrive? What was your journey to this leadership role?
So by trade, and right now still I'm very proudly on the seniority list as an active New York City subway track worker of TW Local 100. I began working on the tracks in the early 1990s, and there was an absolute necessity to organize, a necessity to fight back. TW members were getting killed left and right, literally being used as cannon fodder by these bosses in the New York City transit system. So there was out of necessity, many of us learned how to organize among other workers and fight back over safety conditions. That led to a lifelong pursuit of fighting back against these bosses and organizing workers. But if it weren't for those early days on the New York City subway tracks and working around electrified third rails and oncoming train traffic and lunatic bosses more interested in maintenance production and construction production than in worker safety and ensuring that workers got home to their families safe after a tour in the subway. But if it were not for those moments, I wouldn't be where I am. So those were the foundational moments where I learned how to organize workers, learned the value of a fight back. I learned that these bosses could be beaten. And that's what we continue to do. We continue to organize, continue to fight back, drive the fight forward. And really, at the heart of organizing is convincing workers if they lock arms collectively together that they can win fights. And if they don't fight back, they're never going to win.
And I know your union has a long history of social justice campaigns. I know, for instance, one of your heroes, one of your many heroes, Mick Quayle, was one of the first union leaders to embrace the question of American Black emancipation, civil rights, both in terms of finance, in terms of inviting people to Martin Luther King, for instance, to address the Union Convention. All of, I think that was in the early 60s. But this was major breakthrough stuff. This was stuff that was outside what anybody else was doing. So you've inherited a radical, progressive union.
So absolutely, Quill and the founders of the TWU embraced the industrial trade union organizing philosophy of the great one and only James Connolly. This was a necessity to organize in the transport sector in America, but the union began in New York, and in these very, very difficult working conditions of the New York City subway system, industrial organizing is what gave us the success we have. Prior to Quill and the founders along with him that began the TWU, craft unions were in New York City trying to organize various aspects of the system. It all failed. It wasn't until the TWU came along and said, we're all in this boat together, and it's going to take one collective fight back, whether you're a porter in a train station or a bus operator or a train driver. We all need to stand together as one. And ironically, this argument about craft unionism and industrial trade unionism and how you achieve the most worker power, the argument's still going on now, 80 years later. Yeah. And it's very clear to me that industrial trade union organizing, as put forth by James Connolly and Mike Quill, is where worker power is, standing together, locked arms, all titles against one boss, one employer. Now, Quill and the members of the TWU, long before the early 1960s, embraced this notion that there is no room in the trade union movement, or no room in society in general. There's no place for any kind of racism in the workplace. The TWU absolutely, as you stated, broke the color barrier in the New York City subway system prior to the TWU organizing and being founded and organizing in the New York City subway. If you were Jewish or you were a Black worker, you couldn't advance into higher paying titles. You were dead ended. There was a ceiling, and the TWU ended that, and we continue to end that all over the country with this concept and model of industrial trade union organizing. Very powerful.
For those who wouldn't know, and I know you're absolutely a fan of both Connolly and Quill. Mick Quill was an IRA volunteer. He fought in Ireland. He went to America. That's how he began this thirst throughout his life for equality and for justice. So there is a direct kind of line there between Ireland and the trade union movement in America. And of course, you follow that through. You're a lover of all places, Derry.
Sure, absolutely. My roots are in Derry. I have a lot of family in Derry. I talk to them on a weekly basis. We're particularly right now in the age of COVID, there's a lot of heart-wrenching back and forth discussion going on between us all. Quill's roots were in Ireland. I'm very proud of that. Quill and the other IRA men and women that became the diaspora that made their way to New York in the aftermath of the Irish Civil War actually were the driving force behind the successful organizing of the TWU. Prior to that, the bosses had hired goons, Pinkertons, thugs to beat down union drives, and it really did take kind of the hardened fighters of the rebellion against England and the Irish Civil War to come to New York and actually stand down the Pinkertons, who really were letting blood run on the streets of New York City, breaking these organizing drives. So Quill was well equipped, as well as his brothers and sisters, to beat that back. And here we are today, all these years later, with a highly successful transport workers union. But our roots are in Ireland.
I've met you a few times, and I would like to have the honor of calling you a friend. And I have to say that you're not a shy person when it comes to rights and fighting for them and establishing them. But for a young man to take responsibility for a union one of the most powerful unions in America, as you did when you became the president. I think 140,000 members strong. Was there times when it was, I'm not sure that I should do this. I don't know if I can do it. I'm following in the footsteps of Quill and Connolly and all of those who went before you in terms of that struggle. Did you have any reservations about taking the post?
Well, I didn't have reservations about taking the post, but I do have reservations about folks making any kind of comparison to this current leadership of the TW to Mike Quill. You know, those are shoes that nobody's ever going to fill, and one would be a fool to try to do it. You take over a union like the TW or any other union, you really have to make your own way. And the comparisons to Quill are really kind of put somebody like me in an awkward spot. It's kind of, you know, it's just never going to happen. There's never going to be another Mike Quill. And kind of like in the London Underground and the RMT in England and Scotland, there's never going to be another Bob Crow. It's just not going to happen. So, but we lead the union. We have a very simple kind of concept. I have a very simple philosophical concept. You know, practical fight backs against these bosses that are trying to exploit workers. Teach workers, lead workers every day to understand that they can win if they fight back. This age of COVID-19 has demonstrated that thoroughly. American workers who stood together, locked arms against these bosses for safe working conditions, for personal protective equipment like masks and gloves and sanitary solution. Those simple issues to defend our health and safety against COVID-19 were not taken for, they were not simply done. We've taken strike action in America to defend the safety of our members during COVID-19. We came very close, for instance, to shutting down the city of Philadelphia and their subway and bus system simply over workplace health conditions in the age of COVID. So again, my philosophical concept is if you don't fight, you're never going to win. If you do fight, you may not win always, but you can't win if you don't fight.
And I know that from taking over, and I know you develop a collective leadership, but you're the president. There's only you as president when all said and done. That part of the priority you set for yourself was to expand the size of the union, and you've been quite successful in doing that. I think 15,000 additional members.
Yeah, so we're actually up to a little over 150,000 members now. We've been organizing vigorously for the last 3 years. As the president of Local 100 in New York City, we organize vigorously as well. The bigger the union gets, the more power that we have to actually advance the livelihoods of our individual members. So we've been working diligently to have our broader membership embrace that concept. The bigger we get, the more power we have to drive, for instance, a political agenda in Florida or New York, or even in Washington, D.C. And certainly just this latest stimulus package that was passed, we played a major role, really an unprecedented role for the TWU in shaping what that stimulus package looked like for transportation sector workers. And I mean, one of the great outcomes of this latest stimulus package is that any employer, whether they be in the airlines like American Airlines or JetBlue, or whether they be a transit system like the New York Transit System or our system in San Francisco, if they take a dime of this stimulus money, it comes with payroll protections for our members. Our members cannot be furloughed if they take the federal government's money. And in fact, on the airline side, when they take the federal government's money, our workers that were furloughed due to the COVID-19 catastrophe, they will be quickly coming back to work the moment that these air carriers take a dime of federal money. So this is, I think this is a big success. And it's also something that Quill himself spoke about, is the necessity to have a robust political program to protect and advance workers. So these organizing political action, there's great synergy there. They go hand in hand.
I was interested earlier on when you mentioned the ability of the union through you, through the leadership, to put pressure on the Democratic Party in America to bring in social change, to be aware of workers' conditions, to give commitments that were made before endorsements. And you were the delegate the union delegate, I believe, that endorsed Biden.
Yeah, we did endorse Joe Biden, and I was a delegate I was a national delegate out of New York State. Prior to that, in 2016, when I ran the big local union, Local 100 in New York City, we had endorsed Bernie Sanders. In retrospect, I actually believe that Joe Biden was the only candidate this time around that could have defeated Trump. I believe Bernie would have beat him in 2016. This issue with the Democrats, the stimulus package and their response to COVID-19 has, in my opinion, been very impressive. I think that they've gotten back to their roots of looking after the economic security of working Americans. And the ugly truth of the matter is, if the Democrats had not strayed from that economic security message, Donald Trump would have never been elected to begin with. And this great fracture that you see among the American people wouldn't exist if the Democrats held true and looked after the economic advancement and protection of working Americans. It was their departure with NAFTA, for instance, or normalization of trade with China, and these actions that created the Rust Belt across America. It's all the residual aftermath of that propelled Donald Trump into office. And if the Democrats do pull away from that, which we're going to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they do not, if they pull away from this economic populist message that supports American workers, another Donald Trump is simply going to rise again and win the election. So I believe one of the major roles of the trade union movement in America right now is holding the Democratic Party's feet to the fire, and President Biden himself, or President-elect Biden himself, to ensure that they just continue to prioritize the economic conditions facing American workers and all of the cultural issues that the Democratic Party has embraced in the past. They're all good and well, but it needs to come behind economic security for American workers.
Some of us from this side of the world watched in horror over the last 4 years the antics of Trump and his cronies and what appeared to be corrupt practice and appeared to be just underhand dealing, both with people who had an association with him and his political opponents. That seems to have divided America nearly, like, almost in half. How difficult has it been for a trade union to hold its membership together when this division has been fostered upon them?
So the divisions have been going on for quite some time. There's this enigma in America, and I know there is as well. There is in Ireland as well, and certainly there is in the UK, of working class conservatism and workers voting for something that's clearly outside their economic interest. And again, I just return to the sort of betrayal of the Democrats regarding the exploitation of American jobs and not focusing on the economic depravity that was beginning to take root in America. And again, the last 4 years of Trump is really, it's not the disease, it's the symptom of the disease. Yeah. That's what Donald Trump is, the symptom of the disease, and Trumpism, or whatever you want to call it. But I do think that's a word now, Trumpism, as we go forward. And the only way Trumpism is defeated is to continue to focus and advance working people economically.
The developments over this last few days and the attack on the Capitol, the invasion, and all of that, what has been described by American media as an attempted coup, how serious a coup is another matter. Does it put the union in the position that you're one of the very few structures in American society that has that ability to reach all parts of American opinion, because you're there to serve their interests? Does it put you in a more difficult position, or does it make your job easier?
It certainly doesn't make our job easier. We have a membership that is divided to some extent. It's not as divided as it was 4 years ago between support for Trump and support for the Democratic Party in general, or even when it comes down to supporting Trump over the trade union movement itself, over the TW itself. Now, the fact that Trump sold everybody really what's factually and objectively a fairly big lie 4 years ago about the restoration of American manufacturing jobs, the an infusion of resources into the economic well-being of American workers. So very little of that happened, and it was the big lie, and it has changed around and changed hearts and minds of workers who would have otherwise supported Trump. And I do think support for Trump, particularly 4 years ago when he won the election, was as much of a protest vote against the Democratic Party as it was for the man himself. And again, if the Democrats do not hold true to this economic populist message which Joe Biden is putting forward, perhaps more than any other president that I've seen before him, if they don't hold true to that, we're going to slip right back to a point in time where Trump, or perhaps one of his children, or somebody very much like Trump, could win the election again.
I should have said at the beginning of our discussion, this interview or discussion or conversation has been titled "The Biden Years," and we will revisit the subject as we go along. We're broadcasting from the Connolly Centre, and I have to say and acknowledge that there wouldn't be a Connolly Centre without your help, without your assistance, without the drive that you put into it. So for that, I want to thank you. I want to take you back just briefly, and I should have asked at the time, your connection with Derry, is it a family connection? Where does it come from?
Yeah, my granny was born in Derry, so I have a lot of family right now in Cregan and Chantallo, in the Bogside. I've gone to Derry as much as I can. I spent long weeks at a time there 20, 30 years ago, growing up really kind of in my early 20s. It's a place that I really would look to retire in, to be honest. That Inishowen Peninsula, all right, not Derry, Donegal, but it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. And my granny and my mom still have a piece of land there in Lisvana that I would love to retire on. I don't know if that'd be possible, but yeah, I have a deep connection to Derry. I'm from Southern Brooklyn. I was born in Southern Brooklyn, right on the Atlantic Ocean in Southern Brooklyn, blue collar Irish Brooklyn, essentially. And outside of this part of Brooklyn, where I happen to be right now, kind of Derry is a second home.
I'm just looking as you speak at the imagery behind you. And I know you can't take us through all of it, but clearly you're a fan of Connolly, clearly, absolutely. And you're also a sports fan. You're also someone who has a deep knowledge of Irish history. When you're not involved in fighting for justice in America, fighting for justice and equality in Ireland, how do you relax? What do you do?
Well, I'm sure you can see behind me, I'm a big-time New York Mets fan. I was, cracking a bit of jokes with Harry yesterday or late last night about how the New York Mets just acquired Francisco Lindor, the best shortstop in the game, arguably. So, I don't occupy all my time as a New York Mets fan when I'm not working, but certainly sports and the pursuit of a World Series dream for the New York Mets again. The last time they won was 1986. It's a big part of my life, and my brothers and most of my friends. And New York City is a baseball city, right? It's everything's the New York Mets or the New York Yankees, and on the football side, it's the New York Jets or the Giants. So it is a big part of life, and honestly, sports is a big part of working class life in America, and particularly within the TW, and particularly in New York. You're a Mets fan or a Yankees fan, these are ongoing debates, mostly friendly debates in our bus depots and our break rooms. So yeah, what you see behind me is really a product of my youth. I grew up playing baseball like every other American kid, and played third base, and I love the game. So
that's that. Whenever you do have some time off, that's where your interest take you. I also mentioned when we done the introduction there that you have made a substantial change in the perception of the question of Irish unity among sizable and influential sections of Irish American and American opinion. So just tell me a wee bit about that work that you do.
So, well, obviously I was raised in a what we would call an Irish house, right? I think that sort of America is a kind of a different place in a way. If your parents are from Ireland and you go to England and you're born in England and you're raised in London, say, even in an Irish area of London, you refer to yourself as English. That just doesn't happen over here. If your parents are from Ireland or your grandparents are from Ireland and you come to New York or Philadelphia or Chicago and somebody asks you what you are, you almost instinctively say, I'm Irish. You don't say, well, I'm American and I happen to be of Irish descent. It doesn't work that way here, particularly for blue collar Americans, working class Americans. So I was raised in an Irish house. My name is Samuelsen, right? It's a Norwegian name, but in a typically American family, my father is half Norwegian and half Irish. His roots are in Cork, and my mother is 100% Irish, and with a DNA test to prove it that she thankfully took before she passed. So I grew up in an Irish house, and the issue of Irish unification has been at least a subject of discussion for my entire life. I had an uncle named Joe Foy, who was a Teamster official. He was a huge pursuer of human rights in the north of Ireland and ultimately Irish unification. 26 plus 6 equals 1 is on that backdrop somewhere. I have a bumper sticker on my car that says it. And this is the dream. This is the dream of Irish Americans, that there'll be a unified Ireland before our work is done. And it's not only me. I have so many brothers and sisters in the trade union movement. John Murphy from the plumbers, Patty Dolan from the steam fitters, mostly, New Yorkers. Of course, the great Terry Sullivan, the head of LIUNA, who I'm sure you know well.
Yes, of course.
He's based out of Washington, D.C., has just emerged as a friend and a mentor to me in some ways. There's a huge desire to see unification of Ireland in our lifetime. We've invested resources, as you know, we've invested our time, and we'll continue to fight. And I do think the election of Joe Biden presents us with an opportunity to have an American president get behind the effort to push unification of Ireland and push that vote.
The image that's portrayed very often in the British media of Irish America is romantic, beer drinking, St. Patrick's Day celebrators. You couldn't be further from that. I mean, I've met you on you're very sharp, you're very focused in your work, you're very focused in both in terms of your work about Ireland and your work in America. Are you a new generation? Are you a new defined Irish American generation that has moved through education, through job creation and all of that? And does the work that you do make Irish unity, or the new Ireland that we all are striving for, does it make it more likely, or does it make it more difficult?
First of all, we guys like me, we absolutely stand on the shoulders of the Irish trade unionists that came before us. And even in terms of this push, there's certainly nothing new about the ideas that I have. I mean, guys like Dan Kane from the Teamsters and Joe Jameson, who you may know,
yes,
who happens to be a member of the TW. These are fellas that have been around a long time and been fighting this fight long before when I was drinking beer in the bars of Brooklyn. These guys were fighting that good political fight. Before I was an officer of the union, before I was heavily involved in this, they fought this fight. And so I don't think this is anything new. I think circumstances have evolved. The Good Friday Agreement has introduced a new era. And by the way, the support of the Good Friday Agreement by Irish American trade unionists was extremely heavy. And so I think we make incremental progress. And whatever point in time we're at right now is due to the work of the Irish trade unionists who preceded me and the folks that are with me right now in this fight.
Well, I know that I think you're a bit modest, by the way. I think there is a new power that came out of America in more recent years. And let me just give you one casual example of that. There is no doubt that if Boris Johnson had been given a free hand, that he would have reintroduced borders in Ireland. And there is also no doubt that it was the threat of trade embargoes by Nancy Pelosi and by Chuck Schumer that prevented him from doing that. And equally, there is no doubt that people like you brought that pressure to bear. So that's when I say a new power. I mean, I think That's what I'm trying to refer to.
Well, so, Nancy Pelosi was with us in the north of Ireland. I was very proud to have her there. It was a very proud moment for me, and kind of changed my opinion of her a little bit, to be honest, when she stood on that road to Buncrana out of Derry, where I had gone through the checkpoints many, many, many times before, and there's simply a non-existent checkpoint there. And she made it very clear to Boris Johnson and to the entire world that the U.S. Congress would stand behind the people of Ireland and Irish America in that fight. And Chuck Schumer as well, and Richie Neal from Massachusetts absolutely has been a huge defender of Ireland and of Irish Americans' pursuit of a unified Ireland. So we're at a point in time where certainly there is a new wave of Irish trade union leadership that's invigorated, because we can see it. We can see it almost like on an organizing drive where we can see the victory, like we're going to beat this boss. We just have to work hard. We have to double down. We're at a point in time where we see it. We can feel it. We know it can happen in our lifetimes if we work hard enough.
What does Biden bring to the union and to rank and file Americans? Is it hope? Is it aspiration? Is it a practical solution to the problems you outlined? And you mentioned the Rust Belt, and you mentioned the neglect of poorer areas in America. Does Biden bring hope that can change?
Well, honestly, I think that Joe Biden was a big wig in the Democratic Party when NAFTA was signed and when that Rust Belt was created and when trade was normalized with China. I do think as he's gone on in years, he's bending back toward the economic populism that's necessary to advance American workers. I think he recognizes the damage that was done, and certainly his economic platform has been tremendous. And I think one indicator to me, which is really given me a trust in a Biden presidency that I would not have had otherwise, is the open involvement of the trade union movement in forming the policies of the Biden transition team. That it's really been unprecedented involvement by the trade unions. I've had so many conversations related to transportation policy and what is necessary to advance and protect transportation workers as we go into, for instance, this technological revolution that's upon us with that Biden transition. I do not believe that happened in any other presidency. Certainly, I was not the leader of the TWU when Bill Clinton came around, or even Obama. But I believe that has not happened, and I do believe that just another issue, and it's kind of unrelated. America is very divided. I'm sure you watched the television yesterday and you saw the effort to undermine our republic. That was a total insanity. I watched that with my sons on the television, a complete state of disbelief. Folks just rampaging through the Capitol, which is, it's the heart of our republic. And to that point, I think one of the first things that Joe Biden has to do is begin to bring healing to the country. There's a reason why workers wanted to support Donald Trump. And again, at the root of that is the belief that Trump was a better candidate to bring economic security to working people than the Democrats, certainly than Hillary Clinton. And I think Joe Biden has to begin to heal rapidly. And just as an aside, and I'm probably in an extreme minority believing this, but there's a lot of discussion right now about Article 25, about the 25th Amendment and impeaching Trump. And I'm just not a fan of it. I understand the reasons why people would want to do it, but it's my belief that if Congress pursues that, it's just going to further divide the American people. It's going to cause riots in American cities. It's going to cause violence, American against American. I think it's unnecessary. The guy's going to be gone in 13 days. And I think any effort toward impeachment is going to distract from the immediate work that has to happen of rebuilding the economic health of America for working people. And I think it's a mistake to get caught up in any more Trump madness right now. I think it just needs to be let go. I think the guy needs to be just 12 days from now, just kind of let him leave Washington and let's not look back, and let's kind of get to the point in time where we can begin to build jobs for Americans.
We talked about your love of Ireland. We talked about your love of Derry. We talked about your trade union work. What we haven't talked about is your family. And I know you're very protective of your family, but what is your family? It consists of a wife and the boys. How many children?
Yeah, so I have a wife. Her name is Lisa. There's a photo of her back there somewhere. There is a photo of me and her many years ago. I wish I could get back into the shape I was the day that photo was taken.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I'm sure she does. So yeah, I have a wife and I have 3 children. Actually, it's pretty early in New York right now. We began this interview about 7 o'clock in the morning, and when this interview is over, I'm heading to Florida, partly on business, but partly also to have a little decompression time with my wife and my children. Good. So yeah, I mean, family is it. That's why we fight these fights, right? That's why we protect these jobs. That's why we engage in these justice fights against the bosses that are trying to export jobs out of America. So jobs will be in America for our children and their children.
We here in Ireland at the moment, we are in our lockdown, or I think our 3rd lockdown around COVID, and people are frightened. People are worried. The vaccination is available in small doses. How does the community, and you're a Brooklyn person, but how are your community dealing with COVID? Is there a fear? Is there an apprehension? Is there a determination?
These various waves of COVID have really kind of hit American society in the most terrible fashion. And certainly in the spring with the first onset of COVID-19, there was extreme fear. There was so many people in isolation. Where hundreds and hundreds of workers were lost. The TW ourselves have lost around 150 of our members in the line of duty to COVID-19, and the New York City transit system was hit particularly badly. So and then the summer came, right, and there was a little bit of a recess, a little bit of a rest, and now this second wave of COVID is upon us. I think honestly, in my opinion, the biggest fear among American workers is that it's going to permanently destroy the economy and economic opportunity for American workers. So I think there's a strong desire for a balance. The average American worker recognizes that we have to take reasonable steps in order to protect ourselves and our families against COVID-19, but we have to figure out simultaneously how to keep the economy going in the midst of all of that. And there's a very heavy divide about shutdowns and lockdowns. If you shut down the economy, people are already suffering economically here. And there are so workers are really left with a very bad choice, and there has to be some reasonable middle ground. And it's these extreme choices about lockdowns and which trigger loss of jobs just leave Americans in an absolutely bad spot, despite the stimulus package which came far too late. So unless America adopts some sort of model, more of what I would say a European model, where workers who are locked down remain on the payroll and they remain having a steady paycheck so they can feed their families in the midst of this catastrophe. That's what we need to pursue.
Well, clearly that it shouldn't be the economy faces health. It needs to be a combination of both, because the problem is both. The problem straddles both.
Yeah.
So I wish you and your family well, and I hope you stay safe. I really hope you stay safe. And I knew that your membership had been badly hit. I didn't actually realize it was as bad as you've just given us. That's amazing.
I mean, we're transportation workers in America are kind of we're the unsung heroes, if you will, of every catastrophe. And in this particular situation, transit workers across the country are literally on the front lines, delivering nurses, grocery store workers, paramedics, delivering them all to the workplaces, and we have an extreme exposure to COVID-19. And I tell you, I cited the number approximately 150. I cited that number, but if it were not for the fights that were put on by the trade union movement in America, and particularly in the transport sector, that number would be in the thousands. Just simple fights over over N95 masks for our bus operators, for instance, whether it be in Philadelphia or Miami or New York City. Those fights, if they were not fought by workers collectively locking arms and saying, we're going to refuse to work unless you provide us with a safe workplace, the fatalities would be in the thousands right now. So, but for the trade union movement, COVID-19 would have physically devastated thousands more Americans than it has. And on the economic side, the same thing can be said. But were it not for the trade union movement, these stimulus packages that were put forth would never have had worker protections, payroll protections that required employers to keep workers on the payroll. That stimulus money from the government, had it not been for us, for the TWU and our sister unions, that money would have went into raises in executive pay. It would have went into stock buybacks. It would have went into everything but protecting the workers. So I think the viability of the trade union movement and the essential nature of the trade union movement to defend Americans has really been on full display during COVID-19.
I wanted to mention earlier, but I'll mention it now because it was something you probably don't recall. We had a brief conversation, and you talked about the union's drive through education of workers, through being able to, through bursary, through encouragement, through all of that, of encouraging workers to go back to college to do further education. Is that something that you focus on? Is it something that you have a passion for?
Well, certainly we have local unions that have education funds, that have scholarship funds. The International Union itself runs a scholarship drive every year called the Mike Quill Scholarship Drive that allows us to send our children to college. I think the answer to that is transit workers and airline workers and railroad workers and school bus workers, utility workers. We're all doing this hard work. We're all toiling right now so that our children will be in a better spot. The most important element of education for me is to educate workers how they can beat these bosses. It's not necessarily sending people back to college or letting them or going to night school, which is all good and well. We should all advance ourselves, but learning learning and embracing the fundamental concept of trade union organizing, that we can win if we lock arms and fight back. That's the most important education that a trade union can be doing.
We've almost talked for an hour. You may be surprised. And I know we dragged you out of bed. I know you have a day's work to go ahead and do, but do you see the future for the unions? The union movement in America as being bright or brighter than it had been?
I think there's a very bright future right now for the trade union movement in America. Over the last couple of years, even prior to COVID-19, the majority of American workers are swinging back toward having a very favorable opinion about the trade union movement. COVID-19 itself has exposed massive, massive problems in non-union America. If you're a trade union movement, if you're a trade union member in America during COVID-19, the protections that you were given so far exceed what non-union workers have. And it's being recognized by workers. Non-union workers want what union workers have. They want the payroll protections. They want the medical benefits. Unlike, almost every other industrialized, advanced civilization on the earth right now, we do not have kind of universal health coverage. Our health coverage is linked to employment, and even then, not necessarily so. So this pandemic has really exposed the viability and value of the trade union movement. We every single day I come to work, more workers are calling the TWU to join up. We honestly have more workers trying to join the TWU than we have organizers to send out there to help them organize. And I'm sure it's the same way with other unions and other industries. But in our transport sector, airline, railroad, public transit, utilities, school buses, we do see a very bright future, and we are going to be organizing and teaching workers how to lock arms and fight back under the umbrella of a trade union in 2021 and beyond. So I don't know what other trade union presidents see or feel, but I see a very bright future for the trade union movement, and I think good things are coming.
Just over your head is James Connolly's portrait, kind of almost nodding in agreement with you. And just over my shoulder is Mike Quill looking back going, yeah, that's what it's all about. So the last question before I let you go and get a breakfast and do whatever. You're going away, you're going to have a bit of a break, and you're going to reconnect with your children. You come back. So what's ahead of you when you come back? Are you back into the hustle of work, or how do you see the next phase of where we are? Well, where you are, I suppose.
Yeah, so I'm leaving for Florida today. Certainly not all vacation. I have every intention of meeting with our Miami Transit Union officials. We run the transit system in Miami. I have every intention of spending at least a little bit of time at Miami Airport, where we have thousands of members, jet mechanics, and fleet clerks. So not all pleasure, a bit of business. But when I come back, immediately we begin the task, for instance, of setting a 2021 political agenda now with a Joe Biden presidency and a legislature in Washington, D.C. fully controlled by the Democrats. So we see a brightness in 2021 that just wasn't there a couple of weeks ago. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
No. That's us completed. We've run out of time. I have no doubt we'll be back talking again. I just want to say a number of things. I want to thank you on behalf of RSC Connolly, of the Connolly Centre, for the work that you have put in to making this centre a reality, for it to be an education hub. I want to thank you for your defence of your own workers. And I also want to thank you for your Trojan work that you do on a daily basis around the question of peace, stability, justice, and unification of Ireland. So for all those things, John, thank you very much. And I have to say, I love your background. We should make that compulsory. So for all of that, for all the work you've done, for all the work you will do in the future, thank you for being our guest. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. And by the way, if it wasn't for James Connolly, Mike Quill would have never adopted this industrial trade union philosophy that is still advancing the lives of transportation sector workers all across America. So it's our pleasure to be involved in the Connolly Center.
Thank you.